Now, back in the year 2017, every Zelda fan on the planet was completely shocked as soon as they saw the new title for the Nintendo Switch. It features a vast open world for Link to explore, since most of Hyrule's scenery is accessible by walking, paragliding, or climbing. Besides that, the player is completely free in what he can do as soon as the tutorial section ends. You can do the dungeons in any order you want, take any shrines on you see, explore and go through the world in any way you want, and more. Now, this entire world was made to be explored in 3D. However, could all of this also work in 2D? Well, let's find out if a 2D Zelda Breath of the Wild is even possible. Alright, to start this off, we will look at something interesting made by Nintendo, a 2D prototype of this Switch title. It was seen at GDC 2017, where they showed off how the game was prototyped in a form very similar to the NES Classic. Even though it's all in 2D, a tweet from Nintendo confirmed that this prototype had a stack of extremely modern features, all from The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. The only reason why it was shown off in such a way was to make it easier to iterate on the game's design. The point of this prototype was to test the basics of the mechanics and see how they would play out in a purely functional form. It would be quite expensive and time-consuming to do all of that in the beautiful 3D world of Breath of the Wild after all. In this test demo, we can see a lot of elements that made it into the final version of the game, and they work exactly the same. For example, making a campfire and then using that to light your arrows so you can burn away certain things. Or doing this by using a wooden sword and setting that on fire so you can use it to burn certain objects. All these quite basic Breath of the Wild mechanics already work in this 2D version of the game, so Nintendo has already shown that these things can work. So let's move away from the basic world action-reaction mechanics to something more complicated. I'm talking about the Sheikah Slate abilities. Now these can be a problem because some rely on the 3D world of Breath of the Wild. At the start of the game, you get a total of 4, which are used to interact with the world and solve puzzles. Magnesis, which is like using a magnet. Remote bomb, which is just an explosive you can trigger whenever. Stasis, which locks something in place and builds up momentum that will be released as soon as the time is over. And Cryonis, which creates ice pillars in the water. Now some of these will actually work in a 2D space, like Cryonis for example, which would just create ice platforms on water instead, and remote bombs that basically still do the same. However, things like the magnesis and stasis will be harder to implement into a 2D title, but it's doable. The effect would just be more limited thanks to the world. You can't throw something up in the air after all, but moving or firing it around on the ground is certainly possible. Nintendo can still make some amazing puzzles using these abilities, but compared to Breath of the Wild, it would look quite basic. They would have to make it more simple and quite straightforward, which would sadly enough limit a player's freedom. Most puzzles can be solved in multiple ways after all, even the shrines, which is the thing we are going to talk about next. Now as we all know, these mini dungeons usually come down to 2 different types: combat or puzzles. Now the first is not a problem at all. Almost all the attacks work fine in 2D. The laser, counterattack, spinning dash, and even the circling laser that you need to fly over. Since a shadow can be used to create depth and let you know where you are. Or you can just use ranged weapons. However, the puzzle shrines are a completely different story, since a lot require a 3D world to properly function. Sure, some would have no problem functioning in a new 2D world, but others are just impossible. Like the Yulunai Shrine, where you have to use the gyro to move around with cubes in order to activate certain things like wind, electricity, and fire. This wouldn't be the same in 2D, and would actually become quite useless and boring if you would try to make it 2D. Nintendo mostly has to understand and work with the new limited effects of the Sheikah Slate powers. Now another thing that would have to be changed in certain ways is the dungeons, since they're puzzle boxes, which is a box that can only be opened by solving a puzzle, some requiring only a simple move, and others a series of discoveries. The Divine Beasts are based on this. You first need to solve some minor puzzles after all to get access to the thing you want, the final fight. The fact that you can control these ancient tech giants also adds to this whole puzzle box idea. However, could all of this even work in 2D? Well, yes. We have seen things like this in the Minish Cap, for example. Here we can see a 2-layer type puzzle that kind of follows this puzzle box idea as well. The ice block puzzle seen in the Temple of Droplets. Here you need to use an upper floor to let light in, and then go 1 floor down to get the ice in the right place, so it will melt and you will get the key. This isn't exactly the same as a real puzzle box, but it does borrow elements from it. And if it would all connect together, then it could become one. We have seen quite complex 2D dungeons before with multiple floors and certain things all connecting together, which would impact the entire dungeon. So they could be replicated in 2D, partially, since some of the Divine Beast controls would have to be simplified. In fact, all the Divine Beast dungeons would have to be toned down when it comes to the size and complexity. When you walk around one of these beasts, it's quite open. You can walk around the whole place quite easily to figure out where to go and what's next. However, in a 2D game, everything becomes more difficult to keep track of, especially if a lot of elements in completely different parts of a dungeon work together. So in order to make sure that the player has a good time, they would have to simplify it to an extent, to bring back some oversight. Apart from that, it could work, especially if you make sure that the player has access to a good map, which is easy to navigate, and crosses off terminals once they're activated. Now on to the last segment, the climbing and flying, the things that give you so much freedom in the game. Now this stuff could still work in the 2D game, however its impact would be nowhere near as big as it was in the original. Let's look at the Link Between Worlds, for example. Here we see a lot of higher ridges throughout the entire world. You could easily climb up those and make that possible in the game. However, it wouldn't have the same effect. You can't really climb onto a mountain and look ahead to see all kinds of things you can visit or do. However, it would make traveling faster and grants more freedom, so it does reach a lot of its goals regardless. Now the same goes for flying. It doesn't have the same wow factor, but still manages to do everything else. And like I mentioned before, by adding some sort of shadow on the ground, you can always know where you will land. Because if you don't do that, then it will be incredibly difficult to predict where you will end up when putting away the glider in such a top-down 2D world. You got to remember, after all, games like A Link Between Worlds aren't really 100% flat. Because when they were experimenting with a strict top-down view with 3D graphics, it turned out that the game started to look boring, because only the tops of characters' heads and buildings could be seen. Now to fix this, they skewed the models in their placement to slightly face up at the camera. This makes predicting where you will land a difficult task, but the shadow will 100% solve that. So in the end, all of this is possible. Nintendo could make a 2D game with Breath of the Wild elements work. But will they? Well, who knows? Currently the only 2D game they're working on is Link's Awakening for the Switch, but they have said that open world will remain on the menu for Zelda titles. But if you want to know more about this topic, then check the upper right corner, because I linked another video there about the same topic. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed. If you want to watch more videos, be sure to click those lovely annotations. Check out the join/sponsor button next to the subscribe button, because believe me, it does help the channel and it makes me very happy. And also subscribe and click the bell button before YouTube crashes. Help Article 13, go to your local MEP and beat him up. No, don't.